The contract lay on the mahogany desk before Zara Bennett like a death sentence. Her father's signature already dried into the expensive paper, while the space for hers remained blank and accusatory. She stood in the parlor of their ranch house outside Petaluma, California, in the spring of 1876. Watching dust motes dance in the afternoon light, streaming through lace curtains her mother had hung before consumption claimed her life 3 winters past. Her father, William Bennett, sat across from her with his weathered hands folded, his face carved into lines of determination that told her arguing would accomplish nothing, though she intended to try anyway. "Papa, you cannot be serious about this arrangement," Zara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I have never even met Cornelius Ashford. How can you expect me to marry a man who is a complete stranger?" William's jaw tightened, and he looked away toward the window overlooking their cattle ranch that stretched across the rolling California hills. "Cornelius owns the largest mercantile operation between here and Sacramento. This union will secure our family's future, Zara. The ranch has been struggling since the drought 2 years ago, and we need this partnership." "Partnership," Zara repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "You mean you need his money to save the ranch, so you were selling me like one of our heifers at auction." Her father's face flushed red. "Watch your tongue, girl. I am doing what is best for this family. You are 22 years old, and most women your age are already married with children. Cornelius is a respected businessman, 45 years old with a solid reputation. He will provide you with a comfortable life." "A comfortable cage is still a cage," Zara shot back. "What about what I want? What about my voice in this decision?" "Your voice?" William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "You are my daughter, and you will do your duty to this family. Cornelius arrives in 3 weeks to finalize the arrangements. You will smile, you will be gracious, and you will sign this contract. That is final." Zara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She would not give her father the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she turned on her heel and strode from the parlor, ignoring his calls for her to return. She burst through the front door and into the warm California afternoon, her boots crunching on the gravel path that led toward the stables. The ranch sprawled across 300 acres of golden hills dotted with oak trees, and beyond that, the town of Petaluma, nestled in the valley, where the railroad had brought new prosperity and new people. Zara had grown up on this land, had learned to ride before she could properly walk, had helped her father with the cattle drives and the branding and everything else that came with ranch life. Her mother had died when Zara was 19, leaving her to manage the household while her father focused on keeping the ranch solvent. Now he wanted to trade her future for financial security without consulting her feelings on the matter. She reached the stables and found their stable hand, Miguel, brushing down her favorite mare, a beautiful chestnut named Sunset. The older Mexican man looked up as she approached, his kind eyes crinkling with concern when he saw her expression. "Trouble with your papa again, Miss Zara?" Miguel asked gently. "He has arranged a marriage for me," Zara said, her voice tight. "To some mercantile owner from Sacramento I have never met. 45 years old, Miguel, nearly as old as Papa himself." Miguel made a sympathetic noise and handed her the brush. "Perhaps you should ride. The hills always clear your head." Zara nodded gratefully and quickly saddled Sunset herself, refusing Miguel's offers of help. She needed to do something with her hands, needed the familiar motions to ground her spinning thoughts. Within minutes, she was mounted and riding hard toward the open range, letting Sunset stretch into a gallop that carried them away from the ranch house and her father's impossible demands. The spring grass whispered beneath Sunset's hooves as they climbed into the hills, and Zara felt some of her anger begin to dissipate into the vast California sky. Up here, she could breathe. Up here, she could think. She rode for nearly an hour before finally slowing Sunset to a walk near a creek that cut through a small canyon, a place she had discovered as a child and still visited when she needed solitude. Zara dismounted and led Sunset to the water, letting the mare drink while she sat on a flat boulder and stared at the rippling surface. What were her options? She could refuse to sign the contract, but her father controlled everything. She had no money of her own, nowhere to go, and running away would be both dangerous and foolish for a woman alone in California in 1876. She could marry Cornelius Ashford and resign herself to a loveless union with a man old enough to be her father. spending her days managing his household and bearing his children, while her own dreams withered and died. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up sharply. A rider was descending the opposite side of the canyon, picking his way carefully down the rocky slope on a large bay horse. Zara tensed, her hand instinctively moving to the small pistol she kept in her saddlebag. But as the rider drew closer, she realized he was likely a cowboy from one of the neighboring ranches. He wore dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. 2 pistols hung from his gun belt, and a rope coiled at his saddle suggested he was a working ranch hand. The cowboy noticed her and touched the brim of his hat in polite acknowledgement, but made no move to approach, instead guiding his horse to a spot downstream where the bay could drink without disturbing sunset. Zara appreciated his courtesy and found herself studying him with more interest. He was tall and lean, built like someone who spent long days in the saddle and moved with an easy confidence that spoke of experience. When he finally looked up and met her eyes, she was startled by how young he was, probably close to her own age, with sharp features tanned dark by the sun and eyes the color of summer sage. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice a pleasant drawl. "Did not mean to intrude on your spot. Can head on if you would prefer." "The creek is large enough for 2 horses," Zara replied, then surprised herself by adding, "And I could use the company if you are not in a hurry." The cowboy seemed to consider this, then dismounted in a fluid motion and walked closer, though he kept a respectful distance. Up close, Zara could see he was likely in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat and a strong jawline dusted with several days' worth of stubble. There was something about his face that suggested both kindness and determination, an interesting combination. "Ethan Ramsey," he introduced himself, removing his hat briefly in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy. "I work for the Double H Ranch about 5 miles north of here, just moving some strays back toward the main herd." "Zara Bennett," she replied. "My father owns the Bennett Ranch near Petaluma." Ethan's expression shifted with recognition. "I have heard of your father's spread. Good cattle operation from what folks say." He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with an intensity that should have felt intrusive, but somehow did not. "Forgive me for saying so, but you look like someone with the weight of the world on your shoulders." Zara let out a short laugh that held no humor. "Is it that obvious?" "I have been told I notice things," Ethan said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made something in Zara's chest loosen slightly. "Not trying to pry, though. Sometimes a person just needs to sit by a creek and think. Sometimes a person needs to do more than think," Zara found herself saying. "Sometimes a person needs to figure out how to change the course their life has been set upon without their consent." Ethan settled onto a nearby rock, keeping his distance but turning his full attention to her. "That sounds like a significant problem." Before Zara quite knew what she was doing, the whole story came spilling out. Perhaps it was because Ethan was a stranger, someone with no connection to her father or the Bennett Ranch. Perhaps it was because there was something in his steady, patient presence that invited confidence. Or perhaps she simply needed someone, anyone, to hear her frustration and acknowledge that her feelings mattered. She told him about her father's arrangement with Cornelius Ashford, about the contract waiting for her signature, about how her entire future had been decided without a single person asking what she wanted. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled as she spoke. 3 weeks, he said when she finally fell silent. "That is not much time." "Time for what?" Zara asked bitterly. "There is nothing I can do. My father controls everything. I have no resources of my own, nowhere to go. Even if I refused to sign, he could make my life unbearable until I relented." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his sage-colored eyes distant with thought. Then he looked directly at her and said something that changed everything. "What if there was another option?" "What do you mean? What if you had a choice your father had not considered? What if there was a way to ensure your voice was heard?" Zara felt her heart begin to beat faster. "I am listening." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his expression intense. "In my experience, men like your father, men who are accustomed to making all the decisions, only change course when presented with something unexpected, something that forces them to see the situation differently, such as you making a different choice before he can finalize his arrangement," Ethan said, "such as you choosing your own future husband." Zara stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or feel offended. "Are you suggesting I find some other man to marry in the next 3 weeks? That is absurd." "Maybe not absurd," Ethan said slowly. "Maybe practical. If you were engaged to someone else, someone your father could not simply dismiss, it would force him to acknowledge that you have a right to make your own choices." "But I do not know anyone who would agree to such a thing," Zara protested. "And even if I did, what man would want to marry me under such circumstances?" Ethan was quiet again, and when he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "What if I offered?" The world seemed to tilt slightly around Zara. "What?" "Hear me out," Ethan said, holding up a hand. "I know this sounds crazy. We just met, and you have no reason to trust me. But here is the truth. I am a cowboy, yes, but I am also a man who believes every person has the right to choose their own path. What your father is doing to you is wrong, and if I can help change that, I want to." "But why would you do this for a stranger?" Zara asked, her mind reeling. Ethan's expression softened. "My mother was in a similar situation when she was young. Her father tried to arrange a marriage to a man she despised. She ran away instead, which was dangerous and nearly got her killed. Eventually, she met my father, and they built a life together on their own terms. But she always said she wished someone had helped her, had given her a real choice instead of forcing her to choose between a bad marriage and running away with nothing." "Where are your parents now?" Zara asked quietly. "Dead," Ethan said simply. "Fever took them both 5 years ago. But I remember what my mother said, and I remember how important it was to her that she chose her own life. So, when I see someone in the same situation, someone who deserves the chance to make her own choice, I want to help if I can." Zara studied him carefully, looking for signs of deception or ulterior motives, but all she saw was sincerity in those steady sage eyes. "You would marry me, a complete stranger, just to help me have a choice." "I would offer you the option," Ethan corrected. "Whether you accept is entirely up to you, and if you did accept, we could figure out the details together. Maybe it would become a real marriage over time, or maybe we would find a way to part as friends once you were free of your father's control. The point is, it would be your choice." "This is insane," Zara said, but even as she spoke, she felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. "We do not even know each other." "We could fix that," Ethan suggested. "We have 3 weeks before this Cornelius fellow arrives. That is time enough to get acquainted, to figure out if this could work. And if you decide you would rather take your chances with Cornelius or find some other solution, no harm done. I go back to the Double H, and you never have to see me again." Zara wanted to dismiss the idea as ridiculous, but she found she could not. What other options did she have? She could submit to her father's will and marry a man she did not know and did not want. She could refuse and face whatever consequences her father chose to impose, which would likely still result in the same marriage eventually. Or she could take this wild, improbable chance that a kind-eyed cowboy was offering her. "How would we even do this?" she asked, surprised to hear herself actually considering his proposal. "My father would never approve of me courting a ranch hand." "Then we do not tell him until we are ready," Ethan said. "You meet me here at the creek, or in town, or wherever you can manage without drawing attention. We spend time together, get to know each other, and see if this might actually work. And when the time is right, when we are both sure, we make our announcement." "He will be furious," Zara warned. "Probably," Ethan agreed. "But he will also be forced to acknowledge that you made your own choice. And maybe, just maybe, seeing you stand up for yourself will make him realize you deserve to have a voice in your own life." Zara looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly, and then out at the creek flowing past them, constant and unstoppable. She thought about the contract on her father's desk, about Cornelius Ashford coming to claim her like a piece of property, about all the years stretching ahead in a life she had not chosen. Then she thought about the alternative, about this unexpected cowboy who barely knew her, but was willing to help anyway. "All right," she said finally, looking up to meet Ethan's eyes. "Let us try this. Let us see if we can find a way to make my voice heard." Ethan's face broke into a smile that transformed his serious features, making him look younger and somehow more approachable. "You will not regret this, Zara. I promise you that." "I hope you are right," Zara replied, but for the first time since seeing that contract, she felt like she could breathe again. They made plans to meet again the following afternoon at the same spot by the creek. Ethan would bring supplies for a proper conversation, and they would begin the process of getting to know each other. As Zara rode back to the ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western hills, she felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration churning in her stomach. She had just agreed to something completely insane, something that could blow up spectacularly and make her situation even worse. But she had also, for the first time in her life, made a choice entirely for herself, and that felt powerful. Her father was waiting in the parlor when she returned, his expression stormy. "Where have you been? You have been gone for hours." "Riding," Zara said calmly, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that seemed to surprise him. "Thinking about what you said." William's face softened slightly. "And have you come to accept the wisdom of this arrangement?" "I am considering my options," Zara said carefully. "I need more time to process everything." Her father seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. "Very well. But understand, Zara, the decision is made. Cornelius will arrive in 3 weeks, and you will marry him. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone." Zara did not argue, simply nodded and excused herself to her room. Let her father think she was resigned to his plans. Meanwhile, she would pursue her own course, and when the time came, she would show him that she was not a piece of property to be bartered away. The next afternoon, Zara told her father she was riding into Petaluma to visit the general store, which was true enough even if she had other plans as well. She wore her best riding dress, a deep green that brought out the hazel of her eyes, and took extra care pinning up her long auburn hair. She was not entirely sure why she was making such an effort for a cowboy she barely knew, but something about the situation felt important enough to warrant her best appearance. The ride to the creek took about 40 minutes, and her heart was pounding by the time she crested the hill and saw Ethan already waiting below. He had spread a blanket on a flat area near the water and laid out an impressive array of food, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and even a small bottle of wine. "I thought we should do this properly," Ethan said as she dismounted. "If we are going to get to know each other, might as well be comfortable." Zara could not help but smile. "You are full of surprises, Ethan Ramsey." "I certainly hope so," he replied with a grin. "Otherwise, this is going to be a very dull 3 weeks." They settled onto the blanket, and for a moment, awkwardness hung between them, as they both seemed to realize the strangeness of their situation. Then Ethan picked up an apple, polished it on his shirt, and handed it to her. "So," he said, "tell me about Zara Bennett. What do you dream about? What makes you happy? What kind of life do you want for yourself?" It was such a simple question, but Zara realized no one had ever asked her that before. Her father had always told her what she should want, what was expected of her, but no one had ever simply asked what she wanted for herself. The realization made her throat tight with emotion. "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want my life to mean something beyond managing a household and producing heirs. I want to have a voice in the decisions that affect me. I want to wake up each morning and feel like the day ahead is mine to shape, not something being shaped around me." Ethan listened intently, nodding. "That does not seem like too much to ask." "My father thinks otherwise," Zara said with a bitter laugh. "He believes a woman's role is to be ornamental and obedient. My mother was different. She believed women could be strong and independent while still being good wives and mothers. She taught me to ride and shoot and manage the ranch accounts. She made me believe I could be more than just decorative." "She sounds like an impressive woman," Ethan said softly. "She was," Zara agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "After she died, my father became more rigid, more controlling. I think he was frightened by everything he could not control, and that made him try to control everything he could, including me." "Fear makes people do foolish things," Ethan observed, "but that does not make it right." They talked for hours that afternoon, the conversation flowing easily in a way that surprised them both. Ethan told her about growing up on various ranches as his father moved from job to job, learning everything there was to know about cattle and horses and the hard life of a cowboy. He spoke about his parents with affection and grief still fresh despite 5 years passing, and about his dreams of someday owning his own small ranch where he could work for himself rather than for wages. "I have been saving every penny I can," he admitted. "The Double H pays fair, and I do not spend much. In another few years, I should have enough for a down payment on some land. Nothing fancy, but mine." "That sounds wonderful," Zara said sincerely. "To build something that belongs entirely to you, that no one can take away." "Exactly," Ethan said. and the understanding that passed between them felt significant. As the sun began to sink lower, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and gold, Zara reluctantly said she needed to return to the ranch before her father grew suspicious. Ethan helped her to her feet, and for a moment, they stood close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his sage-colored eyes. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. "Yes," Zara agreed. "I will be here." Over the next 2 weeks, meeting Ethan by the creek became the center of Zara's existence. She found excuses to leave the ranch each afternoon, claiming errands in town, or a need to check the far pastures, or simply a desire to ride. Her father, preoccupied with his own business dealings and preparations for Cornelius Ashford's arrival, paid little attention to her comings and goings as long as she returned before dark and maintained the household. Each meeting with Ethan revealed new layers to both of them. Zara discovered that beneath his quiet cowboy exterior, Ethan had a sharp wit and a deep appreciation for beauty. He pointed out details she might have missed. The way light filtered through oak leaves, the patterns frost made on rocks in the early morning, the haunting cry of a hawk circling overhead. He told stories about his travels across California, about colorful characters he had met, and strange situations he had encountered, always with a self-deprecating humor that made her laugh. In turn, Zara found herself revealing parts of herself she usually kept hidden. She talked about her love of reading, about the novels she borrowed from the small library in Petaluma, and read late into the night by lamplight. She confessed her secret dream of traveling beyond California, of seeing the ocean and the eastern cities her mother had described from her own youth. She even admitted her fear that she was somehow broken, somehow wrong for not wanting the conventional life her father had planned for her. "You are not broken," Ethan said firmly when she voiced this fear. "You are just yourself, and that is more than enough." The physical attraction between them grew alongside the emotional connection. At first, they were careful to maintain a respectful distance, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, that distance narrowed, a hand on her elbow to help her over rough ground, his shoulder brushing hers as they sat side by side watching the sunset. The moment when a strand of hair escaped her pins and he reached up to tuck it behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. 2 weeks after their first meeting, as they sat together on their usual blanket, Ethan took her hand in his. Zara looked down at their joined hands, his rough with calluses from years of ranch work, hers smaller but equally work-worn from managing her father's household. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said, and there was a nervousness in his voice she had not heard before. "When I first suggested this arrangement, I told you I wanted to help because of what happened to my mother, and that was true. But it is not the whole truth anymore." Zara's heart began to race. "What is the whole truth?" Ethan met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "The truth is that I am falling in love with you, Zara Bennett. These past 2 weeks have been the best of my life, and the thought of this being just a temporary arrangement, just a way to help you escape your father's plans, is starting to hurt in a way I did not anticipate." Zara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Ethan, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. Whatever you decide, whatever happens with your father and Cornelius Ashford, I want you to know that my feelings are real. This is not just about helping anymore. It is about wanting to build a life with you, if you will have me." Instead of answering with words, Zara leaned forward and kissed him. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had read about in her novels and more. Ethan's lips were soft but firm against hers, and when his hand came up to cup her face, she felt like her entire body was on fire. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I am falling in love with you too," Zara whispered against his lips. "I did not think it was possible to feel this way about someone I have known for only 2 weeks. But I cannot deny what is in my heart. You have shown me what it means to be truly seen, to have someone care about what I want and what I think. I do not want this to be temporary, Ethan. I want this to be real." Ethan pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was something precious. They stayed that way for a long time, wrapped up in each other, while the creek burbled past and the California sun painted everything golden. "We need to tell your father soon," Ethan said eventually. "Cornelius will arrive in less than a week." Zara nodded against his chest. "I know, But he is going to be so angry. Let him be angry, Ethan said. You are not his property, and you deserve to choose your own future. We will face him together, and we will make him understand that this is happening, whether he approves or not. How can you be so confident? Zara asked, pulling back to look at his face. Because I know what we have is real, Ethan replied simply. And because I am not going to let anyone, including your father, take that away from us. They made plans for Zara to bring Ethan to the ranch the following Sunday afternoon. It was the day before Cornelius Ashford was scheduled to arrive, and they both agreed it was better to confront William Bennett with their decision before the merchant appeared. Zara was terrified, but Ethan's steady presence gave her courage. Sunday arrived too quickly. Zara spent the morning in a state of nervous energy, snapping at the housekeeper and burning the biscuits she was making for lunch. Her father noticed her agitation, but seemed to attribute it to nerves about Cornelius's impending arrival, which he found appropriate and amusing. It is natural to be nervous about meeting your future husband, William said over lunch. But you will see, Zara. Cornelius is a good man, and you will grow to appreciate the match. Zara bit her tongue to keep from saying what she really thought. Just a few more hours, she told herself. Just hold on a little longer. Ethan arrived at 2 o'clock precisely, riding up to the ranch house on his bay horse with his hat in his hand and his expression carefully neutral. He had cleaned up for the occasion, wearing his best shirt and a vest, his dark hair still damp from washing. Zara met him at the door before her father could, drawing strength from the steadiness in his sage-colored eyes. Are you ready? He asked quietly. No, she admitted. But let us do this anyway. William Bennett was in his study reviewing papers when Zara knocked on the door. He looked up with irritation at being disturbed, then surprise when he saw she had brought a visitor. Papa, this is Ethan Ramsey, Zara said, her voice firmer than she felt. He works at the Double H Ranch. Ethan, this is my father, William Bennett. William stood slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to the beginnings of suspicion. Mr. Ramsey, what brings you to my home? I asked him to come, Zara said before Ethan could respond. Because we have something important to tell you. The suspicion in her father's eyes hardened into something colder. Is that so? Zara took a deep breath and reached for Ethan's hand, drawing courage from his warm grip. Papa, I am not going to marry Cornelius Ashford. I am going to marry Ethan instead. The silence that followed was deafening. William stared at their joined hands, then at Ethan's face, then at Zara's defiant expression. His face slowly turned red, a vein beginning to throb at his temple in the way it did when he was truly angry. Absolutely not, he said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. I do not know what game you think you are playing, Zara, but it ends now. Mr. Ramsey, I suggest you leave my property immediately before I have you thrown off. With respect, sir, I am not leaving without Zara, Ethan said calmly. And this is not a game. We have spent the past 2.5 weeks getting to know each other, and we have decided to build a future together. I understand this is not what you planned, but your daughter has the right to choose her own husband. She has no such right, William snarled. She is my daughter, living under my roof, dependent on my support. She will do as I say, and I say she is marrying Cornelius Ashford. No, Papa, I am not, Zara said, her voice shaking but determined. I will not marry a man I do not know and do not love just because it benefits your business dealings. I am a person, not a bargaining chip. You are an ungrateful child, William shot back. After everything I have done for you, after I have fed and clothed and sheltered you for 22 years, this is how you repay me, by throwing yourself at some penniless cowboy? I love him, Zara said, and saying the words aloud made them feel even more true. And he loves me. Is that not more important than money or business connections? Love, William scoffed. What does a girl your age know about love? You have been alive barely 2 decades. This cowboy has filled your head with romantic nonsense, and you are too naive to see it for what it is. I see it clearly, Zara insisted. More clearly than I have seen anything in my life. You are the one who cannot see, Papa. You cannot see that I am not a possession to be traded. You cannot see that I deserve to have a voice in the decisions that affect my life. You cannot see that what you are doing is wrong. William's face was nearly purple now. Get out, he said to Ethan, his voice shaking with rage. Get off my property now, before I shoot you for trespassing. Papa, no, Zara gasped. But Ethan squeezed her hand gently and said, "It is all right." He turned to William with a dignity that seemed to catch the older man off guard. "I am leaving, Mr. Bennett, but not because you are threatening me. I am leaving because I do not want to make this situation worse for Zara. But understand this, I am not abandoning her, and I am not giving up. Your daughter deserves better than what you are trying to force on her, and I intend to make sure she gets it." He turned to Zara and said quietly, "Meet me at the creek tonight after your father has gone to bed. We need to make new plans." Zara nodded, tears streaming down her face now. Ethan leaned in and kissed her forehead gently, a gesture both tender and defiant, before releasing her hand and walking out of the study. Zara listened to his footsteps retreating across the parlor, heard the front door open and close, heard his horse's hooves on the gravel drive. When the sounds faded, she turned back to her father. William was breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was cold as winter ice. "You will not leave this house again until Cornelius arrives tomorrow. I will lock you in your room if I have to. This foolishness ends now." "You cannot lock me away forever," Zara said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can lock you away until you are wed to Cornelius," William replied, "and I will, if that is what it takes. Go to your room, Zara. I do not want to see your face again until you are ready to apologize and do your duty." Zara wanted to argue further, wanted to stand her ground, but she could see it was pointless. Her father was beyond reason, consumed by rage and wounded pride. So she went to her room, hearing the key turn in the lock behind her, with a click that sounded like the closing of a cell door. She sat on her bed for a long time, trying not to cry, trying to think of what to do next. Her father could not keep her locked in here indefinitely. There were laws, even in California in 1876, about forcing women into unwanted marriages. But those laws were murky at best, and a father had broad authority over his unmarried daughters. She could appeal to the sheriff in Petaluma, but would he side with her or with her father? As darkness fell, Zara heard her father moving around downstairs, heard him speaking sharply to the housekeeper. Eventually, the house grew quiet. She waited until she was certain her father had retired to his own room, then moved to her window. Her bedroom was on the second floor, but there was a sturdy oak tree growing close enough that she had climbed in and out as a child when she wanted to sneak out for nighttime adventures. Could she still do it? There was only one way to find out. Zara changed into her riding clothes and sturdy boots, then carefully opened her window. The night air was cool and smelled of grass and distant ocean. The oak tree's nearest branch was about 4 feet from her windowsill, a gap that had seemed much smaller when she was 12. Taking a deep breath, Zara climbed onto the sill, balanced precariously for a moment, then leaped. Her hands closed around rough bark, and for a terrifying second, she thought she would fall. Then her grip held, and she pulled herself onto the branch, breathing hard from adrenaline and relief. From there, it was relatively easy to climb down to the ground. She dropped the last 6 feet, landing in a crouch, then hurried toward the stables. Miguel was asleep in his small room above the stable, and Zara moved as quietly as possible as she saddled Sunset. The mare sensed her urgency and stood perfectly still, making no noise that might alert her father. Within minutes, Zara was mounted and riding away from the ranch house toward the canyon where Ethan would be waiting. The ride seemed to take forever in the darkness, even though she knew these trails by heart. When she finally reached the creek, she saw a small campfire burning and Ethan's silhouette against the flames. He stood as she approached, relief evident on his face. "Thank God," he said as she dismounted. "I was starting to worry you would not be able to get away." "He locked me in my room," Zara said, moving into his arms. "But I climbed out the window." Ethan held her close, and she felt some of her fear begin to dissipate. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Tonight. If we stay, your father will force you into that marriage, and there will be nothing we can do to stop it." "Leave?" Zara pulled back to look at his face. "Where would we go?" "Sacramento," Ethan said. "It is about 70 miles northeast. We can be married there before your father can stop us, and once we are legally wed, there is nothing he can do. A husband's claim supersedes a father's." Zara knew he was right, but the thought of running away in the middle of the night, of abandoning the ranch and her home and everything she had ever known, made her stomach twist with anxiety. Sacramento is a long journey, 2 days at least. I know, Ethan said, but I do not see another option, unless you are willing to take your chances with your father and Cornelius Ashford. Zara thought about returning to her locked room, about meeting the cold-eyed merchant tomorrow, about signing that contract and sealing herself into a life she did not want. Then she thought about Ethan, about the past 2 weeks, about finally having a choice. "Let us go to Sacramento," she said. They left immediately, riding north by starlight. Ethan knew the trails well from his years working various ranches across California, and he led them confidently through the darkness. They rode for several hours before stopping to rest the horses near a small stream. Ethan had packed supplies, including bedrolls and food, and he insisted Zara sleep while he kept watch. "Your father will come after us when he realizes you are gone," he said. "We need to stay alert." Zara was too exhausted and emotionally drained to argue. She lay down on the bedroll Ethan spread for her and fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the sound of running water and the knowledge that Ethan was watching over her. She woke a few hours later to find dawn painting the sky pink and gold. Ethan was still awake, adding wood to a small fire he had built. When he saw her stirring, he smiled and offered her coffee he had brewed in a battered tin pot. "Good morning," he said softly. "We should get moving soon, but I figured you could use something warm first." Zara accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little," Ethan admitted. "Enough. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Zara said honestly, "but also strangely free. Is that odd?" "Not at all," Ethan replied. "You are making your own choice, probably for the first time in your life. That would make anyone feel free." They ate a quick breakfast of bread and dried meat, then continued north. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, the rolling golden hills giving way to denser vegetation and steeper terrain. They passed through small settlements and skirted around larger towns, not wanting to draw attention or make it easy for William Bennett to track them if he was indeed following. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 40 miles. Ethan estimated they would reach Sacramento by mid-afternoon the following day if they maintained their pace. They made camp in a grove of trees near a river, and this time both of them slept, taking turns keeping watch through the night. The next morning dawned clear and warm. They were both tired and saddle-sore, but there was also a sense of excitement building between them. By tonight, they would be married. By tonight, Zara would be free of her father's control, and she and Ethan could begin building the life they both wanted. They reached Sacramento just after 2 o'clock. The city was bustling with activity, a far cry from the quiet town of Petaluma. Wagons and carriages crowded the streets, and the sidewalks teemed with people going about their business. The railroad had transformed Sacramento into a major hub of commerce, and the prosperity showed in the new buildings and well-dressed citizens. Ethan led them to a small church on the edge of the commercial district. The minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, listened to their story with patient attention. When they finished explaining their situation, he studied them both carefully. "You understand that marriage is a sacred commitment?" he asked. "Not something to be entered into lightly, even under unusual circumstances?" "We understand, sir," Ethan said, "and I give you my word that I will honor this commitment for the rest of my life." "As will I," Zara added, meeting the minister's eyes. "I know our situation seems sudden, but what I feel for Ethan is real. I want to spend my life with him." Reverend Thompson nodded slowly. "Very well. I will perform the ceremony, but I need 2 witnesses. My wife can serve as one, but we will need to find another." As if summoned by the conversation, an older woman emerged from the back of the church. She had kind eyes and silver hair pinned in a neat bun. "I heard voices," she said. "Reverend, do you need me?" "We have a couple who need to be married," Reverend Thompson explained. "Would you be willing to witness?" "Of course," his wife said warmly. She turned to Zara and Ethan. "I am Martha Thompson, and we still need one more witness." "I can help with that," came a voice from the doorway. They all turned to see a young man in a deputy's uniform entering the church. He removed his hat respectfully. "Sorry to interrupt, but I was passing by and heard you needed a witness. I am Deputy Hayes, and I would be happy to assist." "Divine Providence," Reverend Thompson said with a smile. "Very well, let us begin." The ceremony was simple but moving. Zara and Ethan stood before the altar, holding hands, and repeated their vows in voices that shook slightly with emotion. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed her with a tenderness that made Zara's eyes fill with tears. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back. They signed the marriage certificate, as did Reverend Thompson, his wife, and Deputy Hayes. The document was official and legal, binding in the eyes of both the church and the state of California. Zara Bennett was now Zara Ramsey, and there was nothing her father could do to change it. As they left the church, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, Ethan turned to Zara with a grin. "Well, Mrs. Ramsey, what would you like to do first as a married woman?" Zara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "I want to find a decent hotel, have a real meal, and sleep in an actual bed, in that order." "Your wish is my command," Ethan said gallantly, offering her his arm. They found a respectable hotel near the center of town and booked a room. The proprietor, a matronly woman with sharp eyes, looked them over carefully before handing Ethan the key. "Congratulations on your marriage," she said, her tone suggesting she had heard every possible story about young couples arriving in Sacramento. Their room was small but clean, with a proper bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the busy street below. After 2 days of hard riding and sleeping on the ground, it felt like paradise. They cleaned up as best they could, then went down to the hotel's dining room for dinner. Over plates of roast chicken and vegetables, they talked about their plans. Ethan explained that he had enough saved to support them for a few months while he looked for work in Sacramento or one of the surrounding ranches. Eventually, he still hoped to save enough for his own land, but that would take time. "I can work too," Zara said. "I know how to keep accounts and manage a household. Surely someone in a city this size needs those skills." Ethan looked at her with something like admiration. "You are full of surprises, Zara Ramsey." "I told you," she replied with a smile. "I want my life to matter. I want to contribute, not just be decorative." After dinner, they returned to their room. The reality of their situation suddenly hit them both. They were married, alone together in a hotel room, and the question of what came next hung in the air between them. Ethan seemed to sense Zara's nervousness because he took her hand gently and said, "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for. I know today has been overwhelming." Zara appreciated his consideration, but she also knew what she wanted. "I am ready," she said softly. "I want this, Ethan. I want you." What followed was tender and sometimes awkward, as first times often are, but it was also beautiful in its own way. Ethan was patient and gentle, constantly checking to make sure Zara was comfortable, and she felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, and Zara felt a sense of rightness settle over her like a blanket. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "More than all right," Zara replied, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw. "I am happy, truly, genuinely happy." They stayed in Sacramento for 3 days, partly to rest and recover from their journey, and partly to put more time between them and any potential pursuit from William Bennett. Ethan found work at a large ranch about 10 miles outside the city, and the foreman was willing to provide them with a small cabin on the property as part of his wages. On their 4th day in Sacramento, as they were preparing to move to the cabin, a telegram arrived at the hotel addressed to Zara. Her hands shook as she opened it, fearing her father had somehow tracked them down. But the message was not from William Bennett. It was from Miguel, their stable hand. "Mr. Bennett, very angry. Stop Cornelius left after waiting 2 days. Stop contract torn up. Stop your father says you are dead to him. Stop but I know you are alive and happy. Stop God bless Miguel." Zara read the telegram 3 times, emotions warring within her. Her father had disowned her. After 22 years, he had simply written her out of his life as though she had never existed. It hurt more than she had expected, a deep ache in her chest that felt like grief. But he had also torn up the contract with Cornelius Ashford. Her forced engagement was over. She was free. Ethan held her while she cried, saying nothing, just providing solid comfort while she processed the complicated mix of loss and relief. When her tears finally subsided, he wiped her face gently and said, "Are you sorry? Do you regret what we did?" "No," Zara said immediately. "I do not regret it for a second. I just wish it had not cost me my father. I wish he could have understood." "Maybe someday he will," Ethan suggested. "People can change, given time." Zara appreciated his optimism, but doubted her father would ever forgive her defiance. Still, that was his choice, just as marrying Ethan had been hers. She had made her voice heard, and she would live with the consequences, both good and difficult. The cabin Ethan's new employer provided was small but sturdy. One large room with a sleeping area, a cooking area, and a small table with 2 chairs. It had a stone fireplace that would keep them warm through the winter, and a porch that overlooked a pretty meadow. It was nothing like the spacious ranch house Zara had grown up in, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Ethan worked long days on the ranch, helping with the cattle and horses, while Zara set about making the cabin into a home. She sewed curtains from fabric she bought in town, planted a small vegetable garden near the porch, and took on sewing work from other ranch families to contribute financially. The work was hard, and there were days when she missed the comforts of her old life, but she never regretted her choice. The other ranch families welcomed them warmly, and Zara made friends with some of the other wives. She discovered a community among these hard-working women, a sense of camaraderie she had never experienced in her more isolated life at her father's ranch. They shared recipes and advice, watched each other's children, and supported one another through the difficulties of frontier life. Months passed, then a year. Zara and Ethan's love deepened from the passionate urgency of their early days into something more solid and enduring. They learned each other's habits and quirks, had their first real arguments, and learned how to resolve them, and built a life based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. Zara discovered she was pregnant in the spring of 1877, just over a year after their marriage. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They had so little, and bringing a child into their small cabin seemed both wonderful and daunting. "We will figure it out," Ethan assured her, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Together, we can handle anything." And they did. When their son was born in December of that year, a healthy boy with Ethan's dark hair and Zara's hazel eyes, they named him James after Ethan's father. The cabin seemed even smaller with a baby, and the sleepless nights were exhausting, but Zara had never been happier. Watching Ethan cradle their son, seeing the wonder and love in his face, made everything they had been through worthwhile. James was 2 years old when Ethan finally saved enough for a down payment on land. It was only 40 acres, a small plot in the hills about 20 miles from Sacramento, but it had good water and decent grazing. Ethan and several friends from the ranch spent months building a modest house, and in the spring of 1880, the Ramsey family moved onto their own property. Zara stood on the porch of their new house, holding James on her hip, while her other hand rested on her swollen belly where their second child grew, and felt a sense of accomplishment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. They had done this. Against all odds, against her father's wishes, they had built a life together based on their own choices and their own work. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around both her and James. "I am thinking that I am exactly where I am supposed to be," Zara replied, leaning back against him. "I am thinking about how different my life would have been if you had not offered me a choice that day by the creek." "I am glad I did," Ethan said, kissing her temple. "You are the best choice I ever made, Zara Ramsey." Their second child, a daughter they named Rose, was born that summer. She had auburn hair like her mother and sage-colored eyes like her father, and she was every bit as strong-willed as both of them. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Thomas. The house that had seemed spacious for two now bulged with family, and Ethan built an addition to accommodate their growing brood. Life on their small ranch was hard work but satisfying. Ethan raised cattle and broke horses, building a reputation as an honest dealer and skilled horseman. Zara managed the household, raised the children, kept the accounts, and even helped with the cattle when extra hands were needed. They were partners in the truest sense, each respecting the other's contributions and supporting each other's dreams. Years passed. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with his father. Rose was spirited and independent, reminding Zara so much of herself at that age. Thomas was the peacemaker, always trying to keep his siblings from fighting. Ethan's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Zara noticed fine lines appearing around her own eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they wore their age with pride, each line and gray hair representing a year of their chosen life together. In the summer of 1886, 10 years after their wedding in Sacramento, a letter arrived addressed to Zara. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky but familiar. With trembling hands, Zara opened it and found a single page covered in her father's distinctive script. "Oh, Zara, I am writing this letter because I am dying. The doctor says I have perhaps 6 months, maybe less. I have spent 10 years being angry with you, convincing myself that you betrayed me, that you chose unwisely. But as I face my mortality, I find myself regretting many things, and chief among them is the loss of my daughter. Miguel tells me you have children now, that you and your cowboy have built a good life on your own land. He says you are happy. I want you to know that I am glad of that, even if I was too stubborn and proud to say so sooner. I do not expect you to forgive me for trying to force you into an unwanted marriage, for locking you in your room, for disowning you when you chose your own path. But I want you to know that I am sorry. I was wrong and you were right. You deserve to have a voice in your own life, and I should have listened when you tried to tell me that. If you find it in your heart to visit an old, foolish man before he dies, I would like to meet my grandchildren and tell you in person what I am saying so poorly in this letter. But if you choose not to come, I will understand. That too would be your choice to make. Your father, William Bennett." Zara read the letter 3 times before showing it to Ethan. He read it silently, his expression thoughtful, then looked up at her. "What do you want to do?" he asked. Zara thought about all the years of silence, all the hurt and anger and loss. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate for her father's approval, and the woman she had become, confident in her own choices. She thought about her children and how she wanted them to understand both forgiveness and the importance of standing up for yourself. "I want to go see him," she said finally. "Not because I owe him anything, but because I want to. Because 10 years is a long time to hold on to anger, and because he is my father, even if he failed me in important ways." So they packed up the children and made the journey to Petaluma. It felt strange returning to the place where Zara had grown up, seeing the familiar landscape through eyes that had seen so much more of life. The ranch looked smaller than she remembered, though it was clearly still prosperous. Miguel was there to greet them, older and grayer, but with the same kind eyes. He swept Zara into a warm embrace, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Miss Zara, I am so happy to see you. So happy." "It is Mrs. Ramsey now," Zara said with a smile. "Miguel, this is my husband Ethan and our children James, Rose, and Thomas." Miguel greeted each of them warmly, then led them into the house. William Bennett sat in the parlor, much diminished from the strong, imposing man Zara remembered. Disease had wasted him, leaving him thin and pale, but his eyes were still sharp when they landed on Zara. "You came," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I came," Zara confirmed. She approached slowly, Ethan a steady presence beside her, the children clinging to her skirts. "Papa, this is my husband, Ethan Ramsey." William's gaze shifted to Ethan, studying him carefully. "The cowboy who stole my daughter." "The cowboy who helped your daughter find her voice," Ethan corrected gently but firmly. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then, slowly, William nodded. "You are right. That is what you did." He looked back at Zara. "Will you sit? I would like to talk with you, if you are willing." What followed was the most honest conversation Zara had ever had with her father. William admitted his mistakes, acknowledged how wrong he had been to try to force her into marriage with Cornelius Ashford. He told her about the years after she left, how he had convinced himself he was justified in his anger, how Miguel had slowly but persistently challenged that narrative by sharing news of Zara's life and happiness. "I thought I knew what was best for you," William said, "but you knew what was best for yourself. I just could not see it at the time." "I forgive you, Papa," Zara said, surprised to find she meant it. "What you did hurt me, but it also led me to this life, to Ethan and our children and our ranch. I would not change any of it, even the hard parts." William insisted they stay for a few days, and Zara agreed. She introduced him to his grandchildren, and James, Rose, and Thomas quickly charmed their grandfather with their energy and curiosity. William seemed to soak up their presence like a man dying of thirst, and Zara realized how lonely he must have been all these years. On their last evening at the ranch, William called Zara into his study. The room looked the same as it had that day 10 years ago, when she had first learned of his plans to marry her to Cornelius. But everything else had changed. "I want you to have the ranch when I am gone," William said without preamble. "Miguel will stay on to manage it if you want to keep it running, or you can sell it if you prefer. Either way, it should be yours." Zara was stunned. "Papa, I do not know what to say." "Say you will accept it," William replied. "Not as payment for my mistakes, but as an acknowledgement that you were always supposed to have a choice. This is me, finally, giving you one." Zara did accept, though she and Ethan decided to keep the ranch running with Miguel as manager, using the profits to expand their own property and secure their children's futures. When William died that fall, Zara mourned him genuinely, grieving both for the father he had been and for the relationship they might have had if he had listened to her sooner. But she also felt a sense of peace. Her father had finally understood, had finally acknowledged her right to make her own choices. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift he could, validation that she had been right to fight for her own voice. The years continued to roll by. James grew into a fine young man and took over much of the day-to-day work on the ranch. Rose shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to study medicine, and Zara and Ethan supported her dreams, even when others in their community thought it scandalous for a woman. Thomas discovered a talent for working with wood and became a skilled carpenter. The ranch prospered, and so did the family. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Ethan took Zara back to the creek where they had first met. It looked the same as it had 2 decades earlier, the water still burbling over smooth stones, the canyon walls still golden in the afternoon light. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Ethan asked, taking her hand. "You said you wanted your life to matter. You wanted to have a voice in the decisions that affected you." "I remember," Zara said softly. "Well, I want you to know that you achieved that," Ethan continued. "You have built a life that matters, not just to me and our children, but to everyone who knows you. You have shown Rose that women can have dreams beyond what society expects. You have taught our sons to respect women as equals. You have created a home filled with love and laughter and mutual respect. And you have been my partner, my love, my best friend for 20 years. Your voice has been heard, Zara, loudly and clearly." Tears streamed down Zara's face as she pulled Ethan close. "You gave me that gift," she said. "You made sure my voice was heard when no one else would listen." "We gave each other that gift," Ethan corrected. "You gave me a purpose beyond just working and saving. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to believe that one person can make a difference." They stood together by the creek as the sun set, 2 people who had taken a wild chance on each other and built something beautiful from it. Their children were grown, or nearly so. Their ranch was successful. Their love had endured through good times and bad, through poverty and modest prosperity, through loss and joy. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear overhead, Zara thought about the girl she had been at 22, standing in her father's parlor and staring at a contract that would have stolen her future. She thought about the courage it had taken to climb out her window that night, to ride through the darkness toward an uncertain future with a cowboy she barely knew. And she thought about how grateful she was that she had found that courage, that Ethan had offered her a choice, that she had been brave enough to take it. "I love you," she whispered to Ethan as they mounted their horses to ride home. "Thank you for making sure my voice was heard." "Always," Ethan replied, his smile visible even in the starlight. "Your voice matters, Zara. It always has, and it always will." They rode home together through the warm California night, partners in every sense of the word. Their voices joined in the life they had chosen and built together. And as they crested the hill and saw the lights of their ranch house glowing in the distance, where their children waited to celebrate their anniversary with them, Zara knew that this was what happy endings looked like. Not perfect, not without struggle, but chosen freely and built with love. The Bennett ranch that Zara had inherited continued to flourish under Miguel's capable management, and the profits allowed them to send Rose to medical school in San Francisco, making her one of the few female doctors in California. James married a sensible young woman from Petaluma and took over the day-to-day operations of their original ranch, while Thomas built beautiful furniture that was sought after throughout the region. As Zara and Ethan grew older, They found themselves often returning to that creek in the canyon, the place where their story had truly begun. It became a tradition on their anniversary, a pilgrimage to remember where they had been and celebrate how far they had come. They would sit on the same rocks where they had first talked, holding hands and remembering the scared but determined young people they had been. In 1906, on their 30th anniversary, they brought their 5 grandchildren to the creek. James and his wife had 3 children, and Rose, despite her busy medical practice, had married a fellow doctor and had 2 children of her own. Thomas was courting a young woman he had met in Sacramento, and Ethan liked to tease that there would be more grandchildren soon enough. "Tell us the story, Grandma," begged Emma, James's oldest daughter. "Tell us about how you and Grandpa met." So Zara told them, as she had many times before, about the contract and the unwanted engagement, about riding to the creek and meeting a kind-eyed cowboy who offered her something precious, a choice. She told them about their wild flight to Sacramento, about building a life from nothing, about learning that love was both a feeling and a series of choices made every single day. "The most important thing," Zara said, looking at each of her grandchildren in turn, "is that you always have a voice. No one can take that from you unless you let them. Your grandfather taught me that, and I want all of you to remember it. Make your own choices, build your own lives, and choose partners who respect your voice as much as they love your heart." Ethan squeezed her hand, his sage-colored eyes still as warm and steady as they had been 30 years earlier. "Your grandmother is a wise woman. You should listen to her." As the sun set on that anniversary evening, painting the canyon in shades of gold and rose, Zara reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken. From a frightened young woman facing an unwanted marriage to a confident grandmother surrounded by a loving family, every step had been worth it. The struggles had made the triumphs sweeter. The hard times had taught her resilience. The love she and Ethan had built had proven that choosing your own path, standing up for your own voice, was always worth the cost. They lived many more years together, Ethan and Zara, growing old surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Their love story became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder that true love was built on respect and partnership, and the courage to make your own choices. When Ethan finally passed away in 1918 at the age of 67, Zara grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been given 42 years together, 42 years of shared dreams and mutual respect and deep, abiding love. She knew how lucky they had been, how rare their partnership was. She lived several more years herself, long enough to see women gain the right to vote in 1920, long enough to tell her great-granddaughters that their voices mattered not just in their families, but in the world. And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time in 1922, at the age of 68, her last thoughts were of Ethan, of that first meeting by the creek, of the cowboy who had made sure her voice was heard. Her family buried her next to Ethan on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a headstone that read, "Zara Bennett Ramsey, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She found her voice and taught us to find ours." And on warm California evenings when the sun sets just right, if you ride to a certain creek in a certain canyon near Petaluma, you might almost hear the echo of 2 voices, a cowboy and a young woman, talking about dreams and choices and building a life worth living. Their story ended as all stories must, but the lessons they learned and the love they built echoed through generations, a testament to the power of making sure every voice is heard.